That's the power of these 2,000-year-old manuscripts to arouse modern passions. Despite the legal result which punished publication, the public furor has not died down and the question persists. How can you copyright a treasure for all mankind? With that question in mind, Dr. Hanson would like to categorize and summarize the whole body of Qumran scrolls so that the same general public which forced the scrolls' release can understand plainly what they're all about. And so, let's consider what exactly the Dead Sea Scrolls contain. You might be surprised. Dr. Hanson, this is amazing. With all of the mania about the Dead Sea Scrolls, very few among the general public actually know what's in them. And among those who do know, hardly anybody agrees about what they really mean. Are they secret coded messages written in a strange language that nobody can decipher? Are they a library of science and philosophy on a par with Aristotle and Plato? Are they messages from another world? How much useless speculation could we avoid, Dr. Hanson, if we simply spelled out the contents of these ancient documents?
Exactly. So let's break down the contents of the scrolls according to some basic categories.
First, we have scripture, that is, copies of the Bible. Second, there are commentaries on the Bible, a series of documents explaining what scripture is about. Third, we have hymns, in other words, extra-biblical, non-biblical psalms. They look like psalms, sound like biblical psalms, but they are a collection of hymns unknown to the world until now. Fourth, ordinances and laws, that is, legal regulations composed by the sect which wrote the scrolls. Fifth, what's called eschatology. That difficult word basically means a study of the last days, the end time. Some people think of it as the end of the world. It's a study of final things, of prophecies, and so on. And sixth, we have a whole group of documents we can only call miscellaneous, covering a whole gamut of subjects, many of them in just tiny fragments. And that's the Dead Sea Scrolls in a nutshell.
But let's start at the outset with Scripture. Much of what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls simply consists of very ancient copies of books of the Bible, books of the Hebrew Scriptures, the oldest in the world. We find among the contents of the Qumran library manuscript fragments from virtually every book in the Hebrew Bible. The most spectacular of these is the complete scroll of the book of the prophet Isaiah, from beginning to end. There's also another partial copy of the same book, Isaiah. Beyond this, there are literally thousands of smaller pieces, fragments of every book of the Hebrew Bible, from Genesis to Malachi, with one single glaring exception, and that is the book of Esther. Why Esther? Why would a book like Esther not be among the books copied by the sect which wrote the scrolls? Of course, we can't go back and interview these people, but one conclusion seems clear. Esther is the only book in the Hebrew Bible which does not spell out or in any way mention the name of God. From the other writings found at Qumran, it's clear that God's name, spelled by the letters YHWH, was held in great awe and respect by these people, and it stands to reason that a biblical book which avoided this sacred name deliberately would not be seen as worthy of copying.
We should bear in mind, Dr. Hanson, that the book of Esther was written at a time of persecution against the Jews by the ancient Persians, and it could well be that mentioning the divine name of God could have brought even more trouble and persecution on the Jews. And so the name of God is never mentioned outright in the book of Esther. But this sect, the people of Qumran, were little concerned with such dangers, and they likely saw such a conspicuous omission as a sign not of shrewdness, but of spiritual weakness.
Of course, we don't have each and every verse of Scripture represented in the scrolls. Some of the books of the Hebrew Bible are represented by just a few tiny scraps, and make no mistake about it, there are no copies of the New Testament books among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And not even the smallest fragment of a New Testament book has been found among the Qumran library. A few years ago, someone did try to prove that a few small pieces of a Greek parchment found at Qumran were actually minute portions of the New Testament, but the fragments were so small that they could have come from just about anything. Nevertheless, there are many mind-boggling parallels between the specific language of the scrolls and the New Testament, and I believe that Jesus himself must have been aware of the scrolls. I'll have much more to say about this later. But for now, let's simply remember that the very existence of the scrolls opens a window on the text of the Hebrew Bible that predates all other copies of the sacred books by more than 1,000 years.
Let's go on, Dr. Hanson, and consider that there are also a significant number of commentaries on the Bible among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The people of Qumran were especially interested in prophecy and the end of the world, and for this reason they wrote commentaries on several of the books of the Hebrew prophets.
But these commentaries are really quite unlike the books of Scripture they are based on. Instead of the straightforward story of the Bible, what we have is a jumble of tangled words and bizarre terms, very complex, very difficult, which make little if any sense even to the scholar and the master of the Hebrew language. Not only are these commentaries not clear, it seems as if they were written deliberately to confuse outsiders, that is, anyone who was not a member of the Qumran sect.
But in any case, we need to get acquainted with a number of the mysterious characters who are introduced in the commentaries, though again, there is a lot of debate about who they are and how to understand them.
To begin with, there is someone called the Teacher of Righteousness, the most important character in all of the scrolls. Then there is the wicked priest, an unnamed person of great evil. There's also the man of the lie, or man of falsehood, and the preacher of the lie.
Could it be, Dr. Hanson, that these are the same person?
As with so many questions about the scrolls, nobody knows for sure. And then there's the House of Absalom, a group of individuals who should have helped the teacher when he was killed by the wicked priest, but kept silent and did nothing. And throughout all of this material is the idea that the members of the sect are chosen. They are the elect.
There's one more important aspect of the Qumran commentaries that we need to focus on, and that has to do with the specific technique used in writing them.
And a particular Hebrew word used to describe them, pesher. The word means interpretation of a dream or puzzle, and it involves a special way of evaluating historical events. Basically, pesher has to do with looking beyond the plain, simple meaning of biblical passages to uncover the hidden, deeper meaning. It's a bit difficult to describe to the modern Westerner what this term pesher is and how it operates. So let's think of a modern analogy. Remember the great Paul McCartney is Dead scare of the early 1970s? On a certain Beatles album, Abbey Road, Paul was depicted walking barefoot. He later confessed that it was simply a hot day, but the advocates of the theory said that it was really a secret message, that Paul was dead. In fact, many of the old Beatles songs were supposed to contain hidden references to Paul's death. If only you listened closely enough to the lyric line, or played it backwards. Of course, the very idea was nonsense, because Paul McCartney was and is very much alive. But millions believed and bit into this modern pesher. Oddly, some people still claim that Jesus used the same method of teaching, hiding his meaning from all but his inner circle. But actually, the reverse is true, because Jesus' parables were intended to clarify his teaching, not to obscure it. His teachings were plain, open, and simple, and there was no hocus pocus to them.